and I'm just gonna start presenting my screen. Okay, so first of all, good morning, everyone. Today's workshop is going to be about debate and negotiation. And I'm going to be delivering this. I'm going to be helping out my lovely partner with regards to the workshop, Halim Sulaiman. And before we can start with this, my name is MiniMUN. I'm the Secretary General of the conference, and professionally, I'm an energy consultant, and I'm very passionate about sustainability. And Halim Sulaiman, it gives me the pleasure to introduce him. He's a management consultant at Multistructure, which is a construction design and contracting company in Lebanon. And he's also the communication assistant at the International Youth Federation in the Lebanese chapter. So he's been giving interpersonal skills workshops over the past few years, and we've actually been partners in some of these workshops. His passion for consulting and negotiation is thanks to his field of study, which is the international business management. And he also has a fair share of MUN experience by being last year's Deputy Sec Gen at NDMUN and a chair of the Security Council at Future We Want in New York just earlier this year, actually, in March. So I'm very happy to actually get the chance to deliver this workshop alongside him. And I'm just gonna take a moment to start. So first of all, the number one thing that I'm gonna start with actually is, does anyone remember the last time they faced any kind of conflict whatsoever? And the thing is, if you go back, really back, you might remember the last time you had conflict, which I would say maybe would be a day ago, 2 days ago, at most a month ago if you're a very peaceful person. However, if I ask you about the first time you got involved in conflict, you probably don't remember that. And that's because we have been getting in conflicts ever since the day we were born. And what's impressive is that our ability to negotiate has been embedded in us ever since we have been born. And so the thing is that conflict and negotiation, these are skills that start from birth.
Thank you, first of all, Mariam, for the beautiful introduction. And so I'm just going to continue with the workshop. So guys, remember when you were a kid, a small child, and you really wanted to get that certain toy, or you really wanted to go out with your friends, or you really wanted to play or to have a certain kind of food for lunch? What was the first thing that you did as a child? It was most probably throwing a tantrum to get it, crying, or maybe even accepting the fact that you have to eat your vegetables in order to get that certain toy that you wanted. So that was a form of negotiation. So that was probably the earliest form of negotiation that you've ever did. Negotiation happens every day of our lives. It could happen with your boss at work. It could happen with your friends, family, a significant other, even with the guy you're trying to buy shoes from, or a car, or a house, major life decisions. All of these things are basically part of negotiation.
Absolutely. And, sorry, I skipped over that slide there. But yeah, but like Halim said, our lives are filled with negotiation in every aspect of it. But essentially, by definition, the boring definition, what is negotiation? So Fisher and Urey define negotiation as back and forth communication to reach agreement, where there is a shared interest and sometimes interests are opposed. And it's basically getting the other party to say, yeah, I agree. But the thing is, negotiation is about why and not what. Its purpose is seeing if you can get if you can get your interests met through an agreement versus an alternative. And basically, it's a collection of behaviors that involve communication, marketing, psychology, assertiveness, conflict resolution, and a ton of other stuff. If we can break it down, it's basically Positions are what we want, interests are why we want something, and negotiation is the why, not the what. So we don't negotiate our positions or what we want. We negotiate the why.
Okay, so basically there's two types of negotiation in general. There's the distributive and the integrative. We'll be talking about them in the next few slides. So to start off with the distributive negotiation, you want to picture a pie, and there's only one pie, and you want to try to get the most out of this pie. So it's basically your own interests against the other person's interest. So for example, buying a house or buying a car. As the buyer, you want to get the minimum price that you could actually get the house for. And as the seller, you want to sell the house for as much as it can go for. So basically, it's just individual gains, and your sources are pretty much limited. Everyone wants to claim their share of the pie, basically. You kind of view the other person or the other party as the enemy that you want to defeat. And its aim is not to find an alternative solution that would probably benefit both parties. So you just want to take as much as you can. That's the distributive. Now, if we move on to the integrative is more of a win-win situation. So it obviously involves some kind of combination of making value for value concessions in junction with creative problem solving. So there's joint gains here, and the sources are not limited. And what we're trying to do is to actually expand the pie, to make it bigger. You view the other party as probably a partner or a teammate, where you guys are trying to find a resolution to a certain conflict. It's seen as an opportunity to be creative and to think outside of the box. So that's what we have about integrative in general.
And so one thing to keep in mind is that negotiation is a conflict resolution skill. And within the scope of this presentation, whenever we talk about negotiation, we're tying it really closely with debate in the context of MUN. Because in MUN, when we say debate, we're not really debating. We're discussing our different positions, and in order for us to reach a resolution. But that is where negotiation comes into play for the majority of the conference. And so one thing to note is that conflict can be critical. And an example of that is something that I'm actually gonna show you guys a little video that I feel is really really interesting to watch. Okay, and hold on for a second. I can't seem to be able to, okay, I'll just share my screen. So this video has no volume, but you can, and so that's basically a very nice example about how, you know, sometimes there are some things you really can't negotiate, I guess. And we just wanted to show you this video before we moved on with the presentation, just so you can actually see how sometimes negotiation can be difficult and sometimes it takes on different forms. And there are many ways you can avoid being eaten by a crocodile. So in order to discuss that, I'm going to hand over now to Halim again.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be discussing a bit phases of negotiation. Very simply put, if you want to actually divide them, there's basically 4 phases for negotiation. So there's planning, debating, proposing, and bargaining. We're going to start with planning. So planning, what you want to do is basically just research your own values, research the opponent's values, research whatever you can research about. Basically, you have to list your objectives and their objectives. So what you want and what they want, especially the ones that you intend to get. So those are the ones that you're probably going to be debating for and bargaining for. And the ones that you have to get. So the ones that you must get, these points, for example, are something that are non-negotiable. They are already on the table, and you will not leave the negotiation unless you get these points. Moving on to debating, we're still on the other. No, just before it.
Sorry, I think I lost track there. So are we at this slide?
Yeah. No, the one before it.
Ah.
Yeah, still here. Okay, thank you. So we move on to debating. While debating, the key skill to a debate is to actually listen to what the other party is saying. This will probably help you already answer some of the questions that you might have. It'll give you the chance to actually ask questions about something that you might have not understood. Which brings me to the second point, is asking questions. So never leave something unanswered to you. Always ask whatever it is. Just take the time to ask a question. It could go a long way. While you're debating, clarify anything that might have a double meaning, for example. And always summarize and never interrupt or argue or assume what the other person is saying. Always ask. So just to make it clear. Following debating is proposing. So this is where you actually make a proposal. You need to state the conditions of this proposal or agreement, and you should express your concerns. Every concession should have a condition. So which brings me to actually the bargaining. This is where the negotiation actually happens. So the key words here are if and then. You want to actually make concessions with conditions. So if you give me point number 2, I will then allow point number 3 to pass. Always conserve your concessions and don't give everything away too soon. You don't have to share every piece of information with the opposing side. And never be afraid to say no. So we talked about the phases of negotiation. Here are some steps to a full negotiation. This is how it should actually happen. So after you're done planning and you're actually at the negotiating table, and let's take, for example, MUN. So you've done your research, you've done everything you need to know about your country, and you started the conference. Once you go into an informal debate and you start forming blocks, for example, this is where your actual negotiation starts to happen. So first of all, you have to have an opening, followed by probably exploring a bit, creating some movement during the negotiation, creating closure, and finally closing. So we're going to go into each and every point in the following slides, starting off with opening. So opening is basically just setting the offer at the most appropriate level, and always keep in mind that there's no such thing as a first offer that's too good to refuse. Opening within negotiations are like a game of chess. If anyone knows how to play chess here, you know what I'm talking about. So you start off by moving a small pawn, but in your head you have a plan to attack the queen or to get to a checkmate. So your first move is usually, your first move and their first move is usually pretty far away from the main target. So keep that in mind while opening. We move on to exploration. Here you need to identify the needs, your needs or their needs. So these are the things that you can't go without. We already mentioned these in the debate part and the planning part. You have to identify your wants, things that you prefer to have, and your interests. So the reasons that lie behind what your wants and needs are, why you want them. A skilled negotiator can see what the other party expects the final outcome to be. So if I want to take a very brief example, something that could probably relate to MUN as well. So let's take, for example, the USA versus Iran. We all know what the position of USA is towards Iran. So during a certain negotiation, for whatever reason, we probably would already know what the outcome, where USA would want the outcome to go, basically. After that, you create movement. So creating movement is basically just mixing everything up. So you prepare to maybe compromise, maybe not. You explore some possibilities. Always ask what if. So what if this happened? You're not actually saying that you might want this, but what if something happens? Exchange some things. I'll give you point 1 if you give me point 2, and always be clear. Something that you could do is just to basically just restate everything, make sure that everything is clear, and yeah, that's basically it. Creating closure here, it's the key to creating closure, to actually getting to this point, is just keep moving. Don't get lost in the details, and keep focus on the issues that are at hand, and give recognition to the other party. Congratulate them or thank them for a certain point that they have given you, or something like that. And always give the other party a final opportunity to clarify any issues. So if you find something that is maybe weird in the agreement and that it was not discussed, and they probably tried to put that certain agreement there for a loophole, for example, call them out about it. Ask them to clarify. Maybe it's not what you might be thinking. And finally, closing the negotiation. What you should be doing here is just listing the issues that you guys have not come to an agreement on. So these are some things that maybe could be put on hold for a later negotiation. And you should prepare a draft framework here to actually start implementing whatever agreement you guys are negotiating on. Always tackle the minor details, because you can never leave room for loopholes, and agree on a review process. So every, let's say, for example, 1 month, we'll review the whole process, make sure that everything is going smoothly, and that maybe something else might come up that would actually change the agreement that is signed. A skillful negotiator will never be distracted from his task. I will leave the floor to Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanim, for this wonderful introduction about the whole process. And so negotiation really is a long process, but it can get really frustrating because, you know, like most communication processes in life, there are going to be some barriers. And so the thing is that sometimes people fail to negotiate because they do not recognize that they are in a good bargaining position. Or they may recognize the need for bargaining, but they bargain very poorly because they simply don't understand the complete process, you know, from opening to closing. And that's why you need to be aware of all of the certain, sometimes you feel like the negotiation is over, but you're really in the closure part of the process instead of the closing. And so if the right people are not involved in negotiations, the process is not likely to succeed. And that's why it's such an important field, and like a vast, it's just like this vast field which people are consistently exploring. But there are ways to overcome barriers. And we're not going to be tackling all of them, but we are going to be giving you some tactics. And this is because all the parties in a negotiation must be aware of the alternatives to a negotiated settlement, where weaker parties feel assured that they will not be overpowered. So sometimes if you're overpowering, you want to make sure the other person does not feel like you're overpowering. Because even if you feel like, oh, I'm definitely going to win this negotiation, I have the upper hand, this can create a kind of psychological block. And so all parties must trust that their needs or interests will be fairly considered in a negotiation to combat perceptual bias and hostility. And a negotiator should attempt to gain a better understanding of the other party's perspective. All in all of the interested and affected parties must be represented, and the negotiators must truly try to represent and have the trust of the person you are representing. So it's not really about, I want to get what I want and this is what I'll do to get it. It's also to ensure that this negotiation will be successful. How can I make the other person feel at ease to actually guarantee getting what I want? Because it's a negotiation for a reason. If you were able to get your own way, you wouldn't be in that position.
Okay, so now we're going to be giving you just like some small tips about how to improve your negotiations. So first off, negotiating is not compromising. It's basically joint problem solving and to conclude on a positive note. You should define what your preferred style of communication is between yourself. So this will probably be the way that you're leading the negotiation, and you want to try to identify the style of the other party is using. So, for example, if you are aware that the other party has been bluffing, for example, for many years now, you could probably assume that they're probably going to be bluffing with you. So it helps that if you can try to identify the other style, the style of the party. Listening is the most powerful negotiation skill. It begins with effective communication, understanding your preferred method and learning the method of the other party. Communicate with them in a way that will be most effective with their style. This helps us to eliminate the possibility of misunderstandings that could arise during the negotiation. As we communicate in many ways, everyone has their own style. Okay, so but before listening, you need to be skilled in actually asking questions. You need to know how to ask questions. What questions you should be tackling. Mariam, if you go to the next slide, would be great. Thank you. So there's three main tactics or skills that you should look to while asking questions. So you need to know where your questions are going, so the direction of your questions. You need to ask for permission to ask questions. Maybe the other party would not like to, or would like to leave questions until the end of the negotiation or at the end of whatever they're saying. And you should always state why you want to ask the question so that the answer could be tailored to whatever issues you might have. Always have a game plan before beginning to negotiate. Very few people actually plan before beginning. If you cannot walk away from the negotiation at any time, you will lose. Basically, statistics say that if you're not able to walk off, to get out of the room, or to stand up on the table and just walk away whenever time of the negotiation, most probably it will be a failed negotiation. And it's always helpful to know your options outside of the negotiation. So this is a direct function of preparation. So now we're going to be moving on to some negotiation tactics that we've handpicked. I know that there's a lot more than these, and every rule, every school has their own tactics and their own rules. But I find that the ones that we picked out right now, they are the most effective. You can use them in any type of negotiation. Okay, so the first negotiation tactic is prepare, prepare, prepare. Okay, so well-prepared negotiators are unlikely to accept a subpar offer simply because of how it's framed. You should always analyze your BATNA and your ZOPA. Mariam will be talking about these in a few moments. And you should always take into consideration all issues at stake.
So I'm going to be moving forward with explaining what the BATNA and the ZOPA are. And I'm going to actually start with explaining the ZOPA. And so the ZOPA is the zone of possible agreement. And it's a zone of possible agreement for both parties in a negotiation. It's not a physical space, but it's a space you should be able to identify. I'm not sure if you can clearly see the image on the screen, but most people in the simplest negotiation scenario, which is buying and selling, the buyer has an upper limit that he or she will not cross, and a seller has a lower limit that he or she will not cross. And so the trick is identifying what the seller's worst case and the buyer's worst case are, and negotiating within that. Anything outside, so anything after a buyer's worst case, goes into the seller's negative bargaining zone. And anything beyond the seller's worst case in this zone goes into the buyer's negative bargaining zone. A lot of people fail in negotiation because their thought is, I need to stay in the negative bargaining zone and get what I want. But that's not actually beneficial. Of course, this is a very analytical and conceptual concept. But essentially, if you are able to identify what the zone of possible agreement is, then you are more likely to have a successful negotiation, because a negotiation is more likely to fail in a negative bargaining zone, even if it's to your benefit. But sometimes there is no zone of possible agreement. Sometimes, and especially with Model UN, some things are simply non-negotiable. And so what do we do in that situation? If we want to create a negotiating scenario, then you need to identify your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or also known as the BATNA. And this is basically important to identify your own BATNA and your opposer's BATNA. This is because it's a source of power at the negotiation table, having an alternative that you can walk away from the negotiation table with. But one very, very bad tactic people do is they go to the negotiating table and they're like, you know what, if you don't give me this, I'm going to go to that person. If I don't get what I want, I'm just going to do that. And we've seen this with Brexit, for example, from a political standpoint. Even if it is a source of power, that does not mean you have to reveal your BATNA. And it's more important actually to dissect your BATNA. Let's give a certain example. Let's take Sam. Sam is a homeowner and he has an insurance policy. And he decides, you know what, I'm going to do a market check to compare the prices of insurance policies, because you know what, my existing insurance is giving me a hard time by raising rates 10% annually for the past 3 years, and I don't want to pay that much. And so Sam goes and he finds another insurance carrier that offers a policy for, let's say, 30% less. That is Sam's BATNA. However, he has customer loyalty. Before Sam switches over and does all of this paperwork, he wants to negotiate a lower insurance price with his current carrier. Now, it's sometimes difficult to negotiate a policy price. And so what the insurer simply does is he or she sends Sam a brochure of their services. Sam, instead of revealing his BATNA, would actually and should dissect. And when Sam did dissect the insurance policies properly, he realized that his current insurance policy gives him much more benefits for a slightly higher price. And so this is what happens when you dissect your BATNA. Sometimes you realize, you know what, my BATNA really isn't that great. And that is when you go into a bad BATNA, which is known as a WATNA. And you need to know your WATNA too. Sometimes a bad WATNA without you knowing, a bad BATNA without you knowing is a WATNA. But sometimes you simply don't have a best alternative option. There is nothing. You either get what you want or you walk away. In that case, you need to save yourself. And to save yourself, you need to make sure that you have and you are aware of what is going to happen if this negotiation fails, and transform it to the best of your ability. So, in conclusion, rather than assuming that the deal on the table matches your BATNA point, translate your BATNA to fully understand what it means for the current negotiation, and make sure you actually are getting the best deal out of it, and that you're not consequently letting the other person win without knowing.
Okay, thank you, Mariam, for that. We're going to be continuing with a few more tactics. So one of the most common negotiation tactic is bluffing. So it's a bit unethical. It's basically just telling the other person something that will impress them, and get what you want, even though it probably might not be true. But always keep in mind, while bluffing, you should always act confidently and never hesitate, or it will indicate that you are lying. So exaggerating and misrepresenting facts can throw you off guard. It's not something anyone can do. And always be skeptical about things that seem too good to be true. Another tactic would be to separate information from influence. So your counterpart's statement, like your own, are inevitably one part information and one part influence. So you're actually trying to play the other person more than what you actually have as facts and information. Your task is to try to separate the information from the influence before you react. So when someone makes a compelling argument or a request, always ask yourself these 3 questions. So if anyone else had made this offer, would I agree? Would have I agreed to this offer a while back, a few hours ago, a few days ago? Could I defend my concession to my colleague or my boss? If the answer is yes to all 3 of these questions, then you have separated the information from the influence, and you're actually taking this decision based on facts or based on your own feeling. If the answer is no to these 3 questions, then you have been influenced by the other party, and their tactic has actually worked against you. Moving on to some other negotiation tactics. According to Chris Voss, and for those of you that don't know who Chris Voss is, he's a former FBI agent. This man actually holds the record for the most hostages saved through negotiating. So if you want to take any sort of tips, I really recommend taking them from him. And these are just a few tactics that he talks about in his classes and in his books. So the first one would be to mirror words selectively. So basically just repeat the last 1 to 3 words your counterpart just said, right back to them. It's one of the quickest way to establish a connection and make the counterpart actually feel safe enough to reveal what information they might have. The beauty in this is its simplicity. People love it. So tactics like this will slow down the conversation a bit. It will actually allow you more time to think. So that's mirroring. The second one is practicing tactical empathy. So while practicing tactical empathy, demonstrate to your counterpart that you see the nuance of their emotions. Proactively label their fears. Try to use phrases like, it sounds like you're afraid of, etc. And it looks like you're concerned about, etc. These go a long way in actually trying to disarm them. It also try to list the worst things that the other party could say about you and say them before that they can. It gives them a sense of safety and security, whereas you might be aware. A third one would be get to a no. I know this might be a little bit contradicting to the whole negotiation. You actually want them to say, yes, I agree. But once you get to a no, you're aware of what the other party does not want, which actually helps you eliminate some of the agreements or concessions that you might have prepared beforehand. Being pushed for a yes usually makes people defensive. They might fear a trap. Lawyers actually call this cornering. They have a whole name for it. And honestly, no one really wants to be cornered. But saying no makes the speaker feel safe and secure and in control. So try to trigger that as much as you can. Another tactic is try to trigger a that's right from your counterpart. So the moment you've convinced someone that you understand their feelings and their whole dream and whatever they're trying to negotiate, is the moment a negotiation breakthrough could happen. So try to trigger a that's right by summarizing and reaffirming how your counterpart feels and what they want. A great summary will trigger a that's right, for sure, and it will be done based on feelings and passions that are driving them, but that they might be blind to. So this creates a subtle epiphany and simultaneously confirms that they share empathy with you.
Okay, so thank you for going over these tactics. And I have to say that I have previously used some of these tactics after attending one of Halim's workshops here in Beirut. And I think the most one I was impressed with was mirroring, because I felt like, you know, people, for some reason, they have this reaction to you mirroring their words. And it really just kind of helped create a bond that really wasn't there and breaks the ice. Over an extended period of time, obviously within the scope of MUN, you usually have 3 days to debate and negotiate what you want to get to. And I felt like that was one of the most, I wouldn't say interesting, but it was the most surprising one because it actually did work really quickly. So moving forward, an effective negotiation, there are so many tactics, but in order to master these tactics, you have to have certain skills. And some of these skills are highlighted on the slide. But the conclusion of all I'm saying is, in order to become a skilled negotiator, it's not only about getting these tactics and implementing them. It's also about being an active listener, emotional control, tactical empathy, decision-making, and a lot about interpersonal skills, how to discuss and how to talk, your communication skills. And some of the most important things are problem analysis and problem solving. So these are just some things to keep in mind. We're coming to wrap up here, and we're just going to end with a small question just for you to ponder. And so my question to you would be, what is half of 7? Essentially, half of 7 gets a lot of answers, actually, when we pose this question. But the most common answer we get is that the half of 7 is 3.5. But is the half of 7 3.5? I will tell you no. Halim will tell you no. Someone here might even tell me no, half of 7 is not 3.5. And the reason is because half of 7 depends on your perspective of it. Half of 7 depends on which way you are slicing up number 7. It's very important to understand at the end of this presentation that people have different perspectives, and that is key in a negotiation, because sometimes you simply don't understand why the other party does not realize that this is the best deal for them. Sometimes you don't see their batna, sometimes you don't understand, it's a bluffing tactic, and other times you just can't see their perspective. And what's even more difficult in negotiation is accepting that the other person has a different point of view. I've actually gotten into a fight with someone, not a fight, a heated discussion, about how the half of 7 is 3.5, when my perspective within the scope of this presentation is not a numerical one. It's an analytical, creative, out-of-the-box one. And so these kinds of scenarios and situations really put us in a very critical situation in our day-to-day lives, and can make negotiation harder. And so that is the note that I wanted to end on, that negotiation isn't just about a set of skills or a set of tactics, but it's also a mindset, which is also thankfully something I have been able to learn with Halim's guidance a lot. And so I'm gonna give the floor back to Halim for any closing notes he may have on this presentation.
Thank you, Mariam, very much. So this actually concludes the workshop. First off, I want to thank you, Mariam, and I want to thank RG1 for giving me this platform to actually try to help the delegates in any way possible. And on another note, delegates, I wish you good luck. You guys have a tough conference up ahead, and I'm sure that you guys will do great. And also, if anyone here would like to actually connect, I'm leaving my email and my LinkedIn profile in the chat. So that's all from me. Thank you guys very much, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you, Halim. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and I hope you have a great day as well.
Thanks, guys. Really great presentation. Really appreciate you putting that together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.